Well, good afternoon. We're here in Washington, D.C. Grant Cameron. My goodness, what a pleasure to have you with us.
Well, thanks, Victor, and thanks for your interest in what I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, as a fellow Canadian, we have a lot of things to go over because Canada, as you know, has a very focused place in this whole UFO issue. And let's just start just by giving just a bit of an outline of your background.
I've been a private researcher, UFO researcher, for 38 years. My work was with the University of Manitoba, but had nothing really to do with UFOs. I just had a very dramatic number of experiences in 1975, and I wanted to find out what was going on with what I had seen. I figured somebody in the world had to know the truth to what I had seen, and I started on a quest to find out what the Canadian government knew, which led to the quest, what does the American government know, what does the president know, and it's moved now to what does the intelligence agencies know and who's actually running the show when it comes to the subject of UFOs.
Well, you really run that string together, haven't you? Amazing. From
Yeah.
one thing right up to the intelligence community. That's amazing. In a very specific sense, why do you think this whole UFO ET issue is important just to the average person?
It basically, when you come right down to it, it comes down to what reality is all about. I mean, if this is what people sort of assume, that this is an extraterrestrial civilization visiting us, they are going to have all the answers to all the questions that we're sending kids to school for. Cures to cancer, cures to the environmental problems, answers as to how does the universe work, is there a God? All those questions, if they are advanced, they should have a lot of the answers that we're spending a lot of research money trying to figure out.
Non-trivial stuff.
Yeah, basically everything, and you assume that they know the answers to the stuff,
yeah.
and so it's important to chase it.
Yeah. In another sense, too, what do you feel are some of the greatest challenges or difficulties you faced in pursuing the kind of work you do? Because you do a lot of different stuff in terms of FOI requests and just basic grunt work to get this stuff out. What are the biggest challenges you face?
Well, I guess you're basically looking at the classification that surrounds the whole issue, that it's tied into national security issues, that you're not just looking at the philosophical implications of extraterrestrials, you're also looking at very highly advanced technology, which would be craft technology, would be mental phenomena type technology, that of course you don't want to give that kind of stuff to Al-Qaeda, so the agencies that control this kind of stuff are going to guard it very carefully, and so I find that's the main problem. But you do also have the problem of a media that really doesn't take it very seriously. So you can think you have the biggest story in the world and nobody really pays attention to you. So those would be the two big things. This is the attitude of the media, who should be putting the story out, and the attitude of the government that is, maybe for legitimate reasons, trying to keep it secret.
It's tough to deal with the fact that the press deals with it and just goes up in smoke, and we think that this is the most important issue in the world. So it's a difficult idea to handle.
It is, and sometimes you can understand, like with a media, it's a 3-day news cycle. So what I find is lots of times you'll tell somebody a story, like I did with the Hillary Clinton, the fact that Hillary Clinton was involved in the Rockefeller Initiative, was involved in UFOs and was helping edit a letter on UFO disclosure to the president, and I give it to 3 of the top, the Washington Post, Fox News, and Associated Press, and it goes nowhere, and basically they've done this story, they do a little 600-word, and the next day they're doing a story on something else. So it was brought up here that you basically need sort of an investigative, like a Watergate type thing, where somebody's actually going to spend 6 months and get to the bottom of it. Because if you know as much as I do that ufology is a steep learning curve,
for sure.
that you can't just pick it up in one day. There's a lot of stuff that's happening, and a lot of stuff that you've got to know in order to figure it out. And I guess the one prime example that would show that it did work was George Knapp, who's won, I think, 19 Emmy Awards as an investigative journalist. That was the one time in ufology where they actually, his boss actually said, I want you to get to the bottom of this story. And that was the Area 51 story,
Right,
about the crafts being there. And he was given authorization to spend all his time on this, and so for 6 months he ran around and he gathered over 24 witnesses, including some very high level witnesses, and basically put together a story that said, yes, it's true. There's back engineering crafts, there's a live alien at Area 51, but you need that kind of story to get it going, or that kind of input. The average reporter doesn't have that kind of input.
Just to ignite things, in a related way again, why do you think that so many people, be it press, be it government, whatever, have gone out of their way purposefully to keep this stuff secret?
Well, to me, it always comes down to the classification. I did write an article called the reasons the government has decided not to tell you the truth, and I came up with about 64, 65 reasons. And I say, when you look at it, you start to see on their attitude, because the way I looked at it was you had Gerald Ford, who was very interested in UFOs, became president. Jimmy Carter was very interested, had a sighting, went and became president. They talked about it an awful lot before they became president, and as soon as they became president, it suddenly went quiet. They stopped talking about it, which indicated that something had made them change teams. They were on the disclosure side, they got to be president, and somebody told them something that made them decide, yes, we should cover this up. So I looked at those type of reasons. The number one is the military security, the idea that this is technology that you don't want to give to the enemy, you want to use for yourself. There's other issues such as, will the stock market melt down if suddenly everybody realizes that shale oil isn't going to be worth anything. Those kind of issues. So there's a lot of issues I think you've got to look at in terms of why do people cover it up. And as I said this morning in the testimony this morning, I don't think the people who are running are evil people. I think they are people who are thinking they are doing the right thing for the right reasons. We just disagree on what the next course of action is going to be.
Have you noticed a difference in the reception of this material among Canadians and either the general public or even the press? Has there been any kind of shift towards the other side of acceptance?
I think not so much. I don't talk so much in Canada. I do an awful lot in the United States. I think the attitude is much different when you're talking to media, when you're talking to people, when you're talking to young people. It's just generally accepted. What's the big deal? We get more into the implications of what it all means and stuff. But I think the general public, I think, is basically there. I mean, they basically believe this is probably for real, and you're going to get some older people who are skeptical, who are of the old school that believe, and it's not. I think in the general, the more education you have, the younger you are, the more you're going to find acceptance. And one figure I always use that shows that we are actually doing pretty good is Victor Stanger, who's a famous physicist, a PhD physicist, who's a very famous atheist, was talking about the fact that he wants to write a book. He's very upset about teaching natural selection in school, and that the fact that even though it's taught in school, only 16% of people in the United States believe in the theory of natural selection. There's no God, that it's all an accident, and this sort of stuff. And he said, this is terrible, 16%. Well, we've got to change this. And I'm thinking, well, in the UFO world, it's at least 48%. So we've got 3 times as many people. We haven't got it in schools. We're not teaching this in schools. So we are actually getting the message out. The numbers are rising, and people are generally accepting. They may not agree with your interpretation, but yeah, it's highly possible with all the new stars that are being found and stuff.
You mentioned youth, and a lot of young people are going to be watching this. And what message would you have for the younger people today, the generation that has sort of grown up behind this curve in a lot of ways, and the information is all out there? What advice would you have for people that are young these days to engage themselves with this issue? What would you say to them?
Well, I would say that they should come to the realization that this is, I call it the Super Bowl of all stories. If stories were games, then the UFO story would be the Super Bowl of all stories. It has the most amazing story. It has the most implications for the world, and that this is the way it's going. Whether people want to believe it or not, that if you get down the road, this is going to be an accepted story, all the implications, and it's a chance for them to get on the ground floor and work in an area that, when it comes to propulsion, when it comes to energy, when it comes to proper environment and stuff, eventually this is going to be the way the world goes. And you and I have sort of been at the opening of this thing. We realized what was going on, but I think the sooner young people realize the implications of this technology and the fact that they're here, the more chance they're going to have to make something with their life, that they can do something with this and develop a better world out of what you and I have spent years trying to work on.
The digital age and the level of communication among young people today, it's instant. Everybody's got their phones on. It's just instant communication, and one idea could be known by 1,000 people within 5 minutes.
That's probably going to, I think that's what's going to end the cover-up. The whole idea of the internet, and it was actually developed by the U.S. military. It was developed by ARPA, and became DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Before that it was ARPA, and it was called the ARPANET. And what it was a technology to develop communications so that the Russians couldn't knock out the one computer. So what you do is have a bunch of computers around, so if you knock out one computer, the internet keeps going. And that was the whole idea behind the internet,
Yeah.
was to have secure military communications that you couldn't knock out. But what has happened is that even though they tried to control the media, now the media is going, the newspapers are going the way of the horse and buggy,
Yeah.
and eventually it's going to be, the news is going to be the internet, and you and I have as much control over that media as does the government. And that's, I think, where it's gonna end, is that there's gonna be just more and more people putting the truth online, and that sooner or later, with their message will be watered down to the point where nobody will even pay attention to them.
I've been told that by a young person, he said, I could fill the Rogers Center just by pressing this button, and the number of people that I know that will get the message to be at one spot at one
Exactly.
time. Yeah. One of the things that I'm fascinated by about the work that you've done with, you have, at Presidential UFO, I feel you have reached right inside the White House with a big paw, and you've reached right inside there to show them what we know about what's going on in this whole issue. Could you just reflect upon how you perceive the White House being a focal point about this information, and how your work connects to eventually them acknowledging what the heck is going on here?
Yeah, the president is the key, because wherever the cover-up is taking place, constitution of the president is supposed to be at the top. For example, if you're talking about dealing with extraterrestrials from another planet, the president is the Secretary of State. He's the guy that should be negotiating with the aliens, because he's Secretary of State. If the cover-up is being run by the government, he's the Chief Executive Officer of the government. He's at the top of that chain. If the military is the one that's covering up, he's the civilian commander of the military. He should have this stuff on his desk. If it's the intelligence community that's covering it up, then the intelligence community works for him. So he is the key guy that should be theoretically running this whole show, signing off on stuff. He's the chief guy. So how he reacts to this is very important. And I have seen some changes, especially in the Obama administration. I've seen some moves that indicate that they sort of want it out. They're doing, and I've talked about this quite a bit, a gradual disclosure, where they're dropping ideas into the community. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to tell us what's going on. And at the same time, keep control of the classified elements. How does the flying saucer work? How does the mental phenomena stuff work? But get the story out. They don't want us back in 1947. They want you to know extraterrestrials are here, that they've dealt with us, that there's been crashes, that there's been a live alien, all this kind of stuff they basically want out, but they can't let the cover-up go, because there's classified aspects they need to protect.
Before we finish, do you think that there is some sort of consciousness at work here, doing or propelling all this information, that the level of consciousness that's there?
I spent 38 years in the field, 37 years, I think I was sort of sleeping. Consciousness is the basis to the whole thing.
What do you mean by that?
I saw a lecture last year, and I'll just give you an example of how this fits in. I saw a lecture, I hadn't intended to go, it was a lecture on consciousness and crop circles. The theory was that the aliens are making the crop circles, the 20% that are real, the 80% that are real are also being made by the aliens. They're telling the crop circle people what to put down, the hoaxers. I got an inspiration. 37 years of work, I suddenly realized what it was all about. And it came to 3 key points in ufology. One happens in Canada. The top secret memo was written in November of 1950. In there, Wilbur Smith says that the American officials told him that mental phenomena is part of the saucer phenomena. Now, for 37 years, I didn't know what he's talking about. I had no idea. Later on, we are doing an interview, this is 1991, we come across a guy by the name of Dr. Eric Walker, who's the president of Penn State University. He's got 14 honorary doctorate degrees, chairman of the board of the Institute for Defense Analysis, chairman of the National Science Foundation, high-level guy. We're interviewing him about how does it work, how's the cover-up, how many people are running the cover-up, all this sort of stuff. He's trying not to talk, and at one point he cuts it off and he says, look, let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? And the guy that was giving the interview had no answer. So Walker answers it himself. He says, look, unless you understand about ESP and how it works, you will not be taken in. Very few people understand it. So in 1950, the Canadians say, mental phenomena is part. 1991, Dr. Eric Walker, high-level guy, says ESP is involved. 1993 is the clincher. Ben Rich, who runs Lockheed Skunk Works, SR-71, U-2, stealth fighter, stealth bomber, in charge of the whole thing. He's giving a lecture at UCLA. to the alumni engineers. The last slide he shows is a flying saucer. He says, we now have the technology to take ET home. We've discovered the mistake in the equation. There are two people in that room who are ufologists. One is Jan Hartson, the other guy's name is Keller. They go racing after him. They realize this is a critical moment in history. We've got to find out what he means. They chase him out of the room. They say, Ben, what are you talking about? You're talking about flying saucers. You're saying that you found the mistake in the equation. What are you talking about? What do you mean a mistake in the equation? We want to know, how are UFOs propelled? How do they get here? And Ben Rich turns around. He says exactly what Walker said 2 years before. Let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? And Hartson says, well, that just means everything in time and space is connected. He said, that's how it works. Gets in his car and drives off. And at that point, when I was watching this lecture, I suddenly realized that this is it. This is how it works. Consciousness is the deal. And then we had these synchronicity events where in February of this year, I had a meeting with a woman in Phoenix, first time I'd ever run across this, and they told me I had to meet this woman. I had a private meeting with her. I had no idea what we were going to talk about. And she says she's working for the government and she flies the saucers. I said, you fly the saucers? I said, how do you do that? She says, you use your mind. You fly the saucers. And then in the last 2 months, 15 people have come independently, all told me, that's how you do it. You fly the saucer, they use the mind. So that's what it is. Consciousness, we're in a material world that is dying. The whole materialistic worldview is shattering under the theories of quantum physics. And we're starting now to learn that consciousness is basically the key to the universe. And the aliens understand it. We don't. We're just one step below. And once we understand the importance of consciousness and how it works in the universe, then we will be able to do all the things that you see these UFO people doing, and we will have evolved. And that's why it's so critically important. The consciousness thing is the key to the whole UFO phenomenon.
What a gift. What a gift.
Beautiful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us, Grant Cameron. It's
Thank
been
you for having me.
Pleasure having you with us.
Pleasure.
Take
Thanks.
care.
Bye-bye.